Welcome to Visualize, the podcast where collaboration fuels change. I'm your host, Chris Baker, and each week we'll explore incredible connections between nonprofits, businesses, and the community. This is a space where we highlight inspiring partnerships, uncover strategies for creating meaningful impact, and share stories that show how working together can make all the difference. Whether you're a nonprofit leader, a business owner, or someone just passionate about building connections, this podcast is for you. Welcome back to Visualize. Today I have Travis Joseph from the Local Octopus Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us.
I really appreciate you having me out. I've been hearing a lot of this through the chamber.
Awesome.
So I feel very honored to be here today. I'm glad for you to have me on today.
No, this is fantastic. So we're going to start the show just basically, how did you get started in the nonprofit sector?
So I think I was almost bred for it without really realizing it. So just have a little bit of a backstory, just more about me. I'm born and raised in Michigan, grew up playing sports my entire life, fundraisers, stuff like that. And coincidentally enough, my dad actually ran like a peewee football league, and it was completely a nonprofit. So he was the president. I was the ball boy. My dad did it for about 10 years. And it's like, when we start to have these conversations or I started telling these stories, I would think back and I would be like, well, I've actually been under a boardroom table for years because my dad would be running a board meeting, doing fundraisers where it's like, all right, we need to fundraise for our football team. We're going to go out and sell raffle tickets. Well, there's no difference when it's a nonprofit nowadays. So once we started doing the nonprofit and we got into that world, it was just kind of like second nature for me. But to kind of spin back, how this really started for us is it was during COVID. During COVID, just like everyone else, all their ideas start to pop up. Mm-hmm. How can I get outside? What can I do? How can I, start my next business since the world shut down? The co-founder and I, Max and Stortier, he owns a art agency where it's 26 North Productions. He had a contract with the Bee Ocean Resort. So we had a Bee Ocean Resort contract. He's supposed to put on networking events and art installations, and then COVID hits. So he's at the point where he's like, I just worked potentially years to get this resort, finally getting to that, his foot in the door, and COVID happened. So at this point, I'll never forget it. I'm in Michigan because I went back just to kind of see my family during that time. And he's like, I don't know what to do. I really want to keep this. I want to keep this relationship. So I was like, well, what if we did a beach cleanup? A beach cleanup, it's social distancing. It's outside. I more or less was kind of baiting it to be like, well, who's really going to tell us we can't do it? Coincidentally enough, looking back, one of the first big things we started, first we had beer at our first beach cleanup. Was not the greatest thing. We saw it because, we're looking for partners and sponsors, and people were bringing us beer. We had plastic bags, we had plastic water bottles, and that was our first one. I just remember throughout the years, it was like each person would be like, well, you have plastic water bottles at your event. And I'll just be like, but I'm just trying to give people water. And it's like, well, that's not how this works. So over the years, we were able to kind of transition and, kind of bring in, making sure that our events were sustainable for the beach cleanup. After 2 years, it just got so big. It went from 10 people upwards to now we average about 100 to 150 people. And at that point, Max and I were like, well, our apartments look kind of like a storage unit. So Maxence was like, all right, go out, find some money, or we realistically need to think about maybe shutting this down. So I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I like a little bit of motivation. So I go out, tap into my network, and I came back with like $1,000. And he's like, all right, great start. We need more. So then at that point, we put on our first educational fundraiser. So to put on the educational fundraiser, the way that we did is we partnered up with LauderAle Brewery, which are huge sustainable people over there. Love Miranda. They're a great group of people over there. And they had us come out. So we had Derek Buchholder from the NSU Sea Turtle Protection Program. He came out, gave a great seminar and kind of a talking lesson on what the sea turtles are doing right now during the nesting season, stuff like that. We would charge at the door, and all those proceeds would go to being able to become a nonprofit. So at that point, we raised enough money. We got a lawyer, and I thought getting the lawyer would make the most sense. It was by far probably the most stressful thing I've ever had to go through. It was recommended through a friend. So I assumed that, you give somebody a large amount of money, like they're going to do their job. That was not the case, because filing, you can definitely file it on your own. But we just did not want to do that because, like, I'm not an expert in that field, so I'd rather give it to somebody to make sure that it's filed correctly. I really respect the nonprofit world and like all the lines you have to follow. So we get a lawyer. She had misspellings on our paperwork. She was extremely rude in getting back to us. Like we were told we were a shoo-in because we've already put in 2 years of work at this time. So we did 2 years of beach cleanups. We were at 23 beach cleanups. We only missed one throughout that time due to a hurricane. And then we're like, hey, this is all of our documentation. At that point, Maxence and I were already meeting weekly. We called it Non-Negotiable Tuesdays. So every Tuesday for about a year up until getting our status, we would meet every single Tuesday. We would go over everything. And that's when like we really took it serious. And that's when we really saw the growth. So we're like, oh, we're golden. I'm not too worried about it. And then it took like 8 months. We're putting on educational fundraisers representing ourselves as a nonprofit because we're being told, well, all right, well, it's already in filing. All the paperwork's going well. But like on paper, like we don't have anything that says we're a 501c3.
Right.
So we go through like 6 months of back and forth. And then finally we get our status. And that was just like kind of that like feel good moment where at that point we really turned it up. Started doing more educational fundraisers. We doubled doing our beach cleanups. We started now actively doing sea oat plantings and then mangrove restoration projects.
Hold on. Can you explain both of those? Because like my brain's like, what are we talking about here? So the sea oat project and then...
So funny enough, sea oats and mangroves are basically the same thing, only one's in the water and one's on the beach. So they help a lot with weathering. They're like the first barrier of big storm surges. So if a 8-foot wave is now heading towards the coastline and it goes through a mangrove, well, now the mangrove is going to break that up. Just like how you'd have like a light that's got a little bit of like a honeycomb. It breaks up all that light so then it can be dispersed and all like the power gets moved around.
Okay.
So with a mangrove, it's the same thing with a sea oat. A sea oat are those big sand dunes that you're going to see on the beach. And that helps with the sea turtles because the sea turtles are always attracted to light. So that is kind of a barrier that kind of stops them, kind of pushes them more back towards the water. But then again, when a storm surge comes, it goes through that barrier and it breaks down that wave just a little bit before it gets to all these high rises. So obviously if there's a big storm coming, there's not much you can do about it.
Right.
But it helps break down these. And then also it helps with keeping our sand there because it now brings like a foundation and like a root system for the sand to like stay there. If not, that's why every year we have to add more sand to our beaches. So in theory, both of those things have just almost, no pun intended, like they're overgrown enough to where there's just not enough manpower to really focus on them. There's a couple groups. There's a lot of great groups that are still working on stuff like that, but we're still trying to join the charge, and those are a big part of our activations right now.
One of the things that we love to talk about here on Visualize is collaboration. So you already talked about like working to, with Maxence about building this nonprofit and how you're actually making this a more sustainable environment for all of us. What are some of the other collaboration opportunities that you've been presented with for either other nonprofits or other for-profits that has really kind of like pushed you guys forward?
I would say a big one that has just now kind of come into our backyard too. Again, the sea oats and the mangrove projects have just been amazing for us. It's working with Adopt a Dune. So Adopt a Dune is another gentleman who was just someone who, instead of waiting for someone to do something, he just went out and did it. So he went out, found his own money, and was like, I'm going to start planting sea oats. And like, I'm going to go out and get all of the infrastructure and do everything myself. So that was a big motivator when I met him. And he's getting a little bit older, so he's kind of like, I could see that he's looking for that next person to kind of hand it off to. And I just figured no better project to really kind of jump on with Adopt a Dune. And then MANG, which is MANG, they're based out of West Palm Beach. They specialize in mangroves. They have their own farm. They're two brothers that have been doing it now for, I'd say successfully for about 5+ years. At a very high level. And when we see those type of people that now want to like let us play in the sandbox, it lets us know that, we've done the hard work, and, it's the nonprofit space is it's not competitive, but it's very protected. And as a nonprofit, it's like, I take it very personal for everything that I do. And, make sure that I'm moving in the right direction and with all the different policies and compliances. So working with people like that helped me feel motivated, where it's like they were here before too. And, we've kind of arrived ourselves.
Well, and that's the biggest thing, when you can actually take the moment when your nonprofit is now able to tap into these other nonprofits that have been here for multiple years trying to do some of the similar stuff, but now they have this extra hand. It's an extra collaboration effort that they didn't have before. And it kind of can bridge the gap to actually do better and more things. That's one of the reasons we focus on collaboration, is because when you just have one person or one nonprofit doing something, you're only going to get so far. But then when you pull in the other individuals or other nonprofits, you can do 10 times as much, because now your reach is further. Who you're working with, the community is bigger, and you can get more done. Now, you said MANG actually has farms up in West Palm Beach.
I believe it's in West Palm.
So what type of farm? Like, my brain is like trying to process all of these, because not all these words I'm familiar with. And so I'm guessing some of the audience that are listening today might not as well. So when they have a farm, what does that farm do and how does it work?
So they focus specifically on growing mangroves. So it's like those mangroves are farmed in South Florida and planted in South Florida. So it's kind of the same thing right now too, as we're working with Adopt a Dune, who just is now working with Community Foundation, and
Okay.
Community Foundation is now given a grant to now restart a sea oak planting project at Mizell Johnson State Park. And what it's going to be is like, now we're going to be growing sea oats in Broward County that are now planted in Broward County. Because there's a huge shortage. That's been a huge issue right now, is there's so many issues when it comes to planting sea oats and just growing all of these things at the rate, because over the years we've just been hounded by storms. And when these things aren't really kept up, I mean, Mother Nature does a great job, but sometimes she needs an extra little bit of hand. So they've been somebody that we've been really kind of idolizing over the years, because that's something that now we're starting to look for, is potentially maybe we can start to have our own facility or look at some property somewhere else, like locally in this area, to where we can now start to potentially grow native plants that we can now plant and move around in Broward County.
So when you're actually building and planting or creating these farms, they're not in the ocean themselves, but they're in a facility.
Yes.
And then you can transplant them into the ocean.
It's just like anything, like a nursery. You still got seedlings, and you still got to kind of let them grow up. But obviously, once they're at the mature state, is when you try to get them in the sand or in the water as soon as possible.
That's very insightful. Like, this is a lot more information than I'm actually.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but at the same time, like, we all love going to the beach. It's something that, most of us down here in Florida, that's a reason we either moved here or we stay here, whatever the case may be. But you're right. All the storms have been breaking down so much of Mother Nature, and she can only do so much by herself.
The big difference too now, so like, for example, like why a sand dune or like a sea oak planting or a sand dune is so important. So for example, you see there's plenty of, I'm sure if you go on the beach, you're going to see the sand dunes. But the main difference is where you have those big open areas where you walk out to the beach, right? Where it goes, like, maybe it might come straight from a street. Well, because of that wide opening, not only is there a rush of water that could potentially go through there, but if there's heavy winds, the sand will go through there. And now you got sand not only all over hitting cars, it's all in the streets. So what Lee did with Adopt a Dune with Pompano Beach is he planted a sea oat, like a sea oat little dune right there. So like it kind of breaks up, and that helps obviously get all, like, not have the sand come through, not have the water come through. So there's a lot more science to it than just it being like a plant.
Yeah, no, there's a lot more science than I was thinking. Like, okay, yeah, it's a plant, but it's actually, doing something even more.
And we have about 20, don't quote me, like 26, 27 miles of coastline just in Broward County. So it's like, you can only imagine, like, I mean, we're working at a lot of different dunes, and the cities do a great job, but the cities, they have their hands full. So that's where we kind of come in. I like to call us the Cavalry, like what you mentioned earlier about, like, we're kind of that new up and coming group that is here to help. We're here to learn, or, we're here to help other organizations achieve their goals, because we've had other people that have helped us down the road. And like the biggest like story that is always motivates me is like, I always like being the person that like you didn't expect to show up, but like I brought everything. Where it's like, for example, we've had it was Toyota. It was like a car company. Someone came in and they just brought like a bunch of donuts one day. Donuts, they brought coffee, they brought bodies, they brought such a positive attitude. So it's like I always like to be that other entity that like I might not even tell you I'm coming, but it's like I'm coming with bodies, I'm coming with fun, I'm coming with energy, and just sometimes that's like it can just take such a relief off of that person putting the event on.
Yeah. No, honestly, actually having volunteers and having people there, that's what actually gets the stuff done. So
It's changed the game for us, because now we have more than enough volunteers. In the beginning. It was Max and I at 7 a.m. And that was before we understood how to do the cheat code with our buckets. Like over the years, you figure out how to like move faster and quicker.
yeah,
Even now, we always rent a van now. We have like a little van we rent from U-Haul. And it's like, that's been a game changer, because typically it would go into 4 different cars. 4 different cars would be at storage the night before, would be at storage afterwards. Now we just pack everything up into the van. And we show up, set everything up, and then bring it back. And it's been very humbling over the last 5 years, but it's fun now because it's a turnkey event. Like I don't even gotta think about it.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Visualize. We hope that the inspiration and practical insights can help you foster stronger connections and meaningful change. Don't forget to subscribe, share the episode, and leave us a review. To learn more about Visuals by Momo and how we support collaboration and storytelling, visit visualsbymomo.com. A huge thank you to everyone out there listening. Until next time, remember, collaboration fuels change, and your connections can inspire the world.